Getting older. Tonight I'm going out to dinner for someone's 70th birthday, a friend of mine from the quiz group that I belong to. And this got me thinking a little bit about getting older, the whole process of getting older, aging. In fact, my sister turned 70 a few weeks ago, and she was saying on the phone to me before that she dreaded the idea of being 70. Somehow, 69 sounds a whole lot younger than 70. I have no idea why. But 70 seems to be one of those really significant milestones in life. And maybe it's something to do with that biblical thing of living to be 70 years old, which, for those who don't realise that, is 70. So I'm getting older. I have been since the day I was born. Funny that. And I'm not yet at the 70 point, but I turned 67 this year. So I'm still in those safe 60s when it doesn't quite sound so old yet. But obviously I'm getting older. Like everything that gets older, I'm starting to fall apart a little bit. Not too badly though. I'm not on any kind of medication. I think I'm reasonably fit. I'm not exactly the outdoorsy type. I don't get a lot of exercise outside, but I do exercise in the home regularly, and I try to have a good, healthy diet. It's maybe sometimes a bit of a boring diet, but I think I'm reasonably healthy so far in my life. Ever since I was probably in my mid-40s, people about, say, 10 years older than me were always saying, when they looked at me and I was pretty healthy, they were always saying, oh, you wait till you get to my age. So each year I waited to get to their age, and none of the things that they threatened were going to happen happened. And they haven't yet. So I guess I've been very lucky. But I think there's so much about getting older that doesn't have to be. And I've kind of caught myself in a couple of things that I've tried to avoid. I remember a few years ago, I don't know when I started doing this, but some time ago I started groaning when I got up out of a chair. This seems to be something that older people do. I don't know why. But I heard myself starting to do this. And at some point a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I said, stop doing that. Why are you doing that? There's no point in doing that. Just get up out of the chair. You don't have to groan. And ever since that day, I have not groaned when I got up out of a chair. It's now become a habit for me not to groan, because it was becoming a habit to groan. But why was I adopting that kind of old man behaviour? Another thing is the way I walk. I notice that older people, I'm generalising, I know, but I've noticed that older people tend to walk in a more shuffling way. And when I say older people, I don't mean people older than me. I mean, mean people even younger than me, who are maybe in their 50s and 60s. They start to walk in a sort of plodding, heavy way. And I have times, again, have found myself starting to do that. And I've thought to myself, and I've said to myself, why are you doing that? You don't have to do that. And so I stopped doing it. The same with going upstairs, the way some older people go upstairs. You don't have to do that. Or at least I don't have to do that. I wasn't doing that because of any physical pain or physical disability. It was almost like a world weariness, I suppose. And that's what it looks like when someone is doing that. There may be physical reasons why they're doing it, but overall I get that impression of world weariness. And I didn't want to be that, so I stopped walking like that. And I don't really think I ever started, but I made sure I never did start walking like that. I suppose another part of supposedly aging is changing in your tastes, and some people would call this maturing. But there seems to be a sense that when you get older, you ought to be more serious. You know, your tastes ought to be more serious as well. And again, this is something that I just don't accept. Why should I stop liking, I don't know, Toy Story just because I'm now in my mid-60s? Why should I stop liking modern music, even if it's about young people and young people's relationships and even teenagers and so on? Why should I stop liking that just because I'm no longer one of them? People will say, well, it doesn't speak to me, it doesn't address my issues. But it doesn't have to. I'm not a drug addict either, but I can watch a movie about drug addiction. I've never fought in a war, but I can watch a war movie. So why can't I watch and enjoy a movie or listen to music that's about younger people? Of course I can. Another thing that people tend to associate with growing older is becoming more conservative. But why? Nostalgia is a topic that I've talked about in the past, and I suspect that this idea of becoming more conservative is in fact linked to nostalgia. And again, I can't help feeling that nostalgia is not particularly a good thing, because it dwells in the past. It believes that things in the past were somehow better, that there was this kind of golden age in human history and in our own life when things were so much better. So I suspect that conservatism arises out of this nostalgia, this longing for a time when things were better, simpler. Perhaps if our health is not that good, this is linked to our health, and we're thinking back to a time when we were physically healthier and more fit. Maybe we were happier. Maybe we hadn't lost so much, which is, again, something that happens with age. So becoming conservative, I think, is part of this process of a kind of clinging to the past. And why would I want to cling to the past? The past was not that good, at least not for me. So I'm not particularly conservative in my political views or in my taste. Look, fashion, as far as fashion is concerned, I've always been conservative, or perhaps the word is indifferent. Things are not necessarily great today. I know that. We all know that. But things in the past were not necessarily better either. Let's remember that. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking that there was a good time once and somehow we either have to conserve what's left of that or somehow get back to it. Because when we were there, it wasn't actually that great. At least not for some of us. Another area where people perhaps are expected to change as they grow older is in terms of religion and spiritual beliefs and so on. There's a tendency to think that as you get nearer to death, and let's face it, that's what's happening. I'm getting older, I'm getting closer to that point, whenever it might be that I'm going to die. There's a sense in which we become more spiritual. Well, again, that just isn't true for me. I've always been, to some extent, a spiritual person in the sense of mystical. And I went through that whole actual religious phase, the phase that I call being an Anglican and being a priest. But I've always had that sort of spiritual sense. But I've not in any way begun to fear death or believe that there's something beyond death just because I'm getting closer to it. Something else that is supposed to happen when you get older, there's so much, isn't there, that's supposed to happen when you get older, is that I'm supposed to become wiser. First of all, I would say that wisdom is not the same as knowledge. I might know more than I did before, but that doesn't make me wiser. In fact, as I get older, one of the things that might happen is that as my memory fails, I actually begin to know less as well. But at the moment, I do feel that I know more than I did, but I'm no wiser. I've never considered myself a particularly wise person. Thoughtful in some ways, introspective in many ways, but not particularly wise, not when it comes to living my life. I see precious little evidence around me that older people are wiser than younger people. Yes, I think people, say, from 30 or their mid-20s down are not particularly wise. I don't think their brains are fully matured yet, and they haven't had a lot of experience. They think they know everything, but they most certainly don't. And as I say, even knowing everything wouldn't make you wise. But around about 30, I think people maybe become a little more wise, at least in the sense that they become more practical. And that's because they get caught up in a lot of practical things. Life is not so much fun, it's not so much partying, it's not so much about dating, it's about having a job, having income, raising a family, and all those sorts of things. So in that sense, people become wiser, or at least more practical in their understanding of life. But after that point, I see little evidence that people continue to grow in wisdom. I suppose it's true that as you get older, you do gain more insights into more things. But again, in terms of decision making and thought processes, I don't necessarily think that makes you wiser. Some people never learn. Many of us continue to repeat harmful, destructive, negative behaviours no matter how old we get. And sometimes as we get older, those negative behaviours in fact become even more enforced in our lives. I've mentioned before that I've been something of an introvert throughout my life. I've never been a very social person. And there was a phase in the middle of my life when I became a bit more social. In some ways that's forced upon you because you're in a workplace, you're mixing with other parents at schools. Those situations you're actually forced to be more sociable. But as I've got older, when I began to work for myself in my own home, I in fact became even more introverted, even more socially isolated or uncomfortable in social settings. So some of the negative things that inflicted me in my younger years have actually become more intense as I became older. And I think that's true of a lot of behaviours. As we grow older, these behaviours become entrenched, fixed, and perhaps exacerbated to some extent. So perhaps we become less wise in some respects as we get older. So I know my sister was dreading her 70th birthday because it seems like such a milestone. I don't know how my friend is feeling as he approaches his 70th birthday. It's not actually today, it's next week, but we're having a dinner today. What will be the psychological effect upon him? What will be the psychological effect upon me when I cross that magical threshold? I don't know. If I'm still making these videos in about 3 years' time, I'll let you know how I feel.